Welcome in from your SUV, from your tractor or your ute, or maybe you're even riding your electric motorbike. But from wherever you are, you're with Alistair Moorhead and Glenn Judson, and this is the Al and Juddy Show. Well, what we want to do is reach out and provide you some technical information on a range of agricultural topics which may interest you, but to do it in a different way. Casual and comfortable format that allows you to listen where you want and when you want. This is intended for general information, and for more specific advice, contact your local Agricom rep.
Here we are with Lara from marketing with some new questions for us.
Hey guys, I can't believe it's around about Christmas time. Are we excited?
Yes, we are.
I can't believe it's about Christmas time either.
Have a couple more questions here. First one up is from Dylan. What's the ideal ryegrass heading date split on a standard dairy farm, and does this change across New Zealand?
That's quite a broad question. I think the reality is that many dairy farms in New Zealand are using quite late flowering genetics. Key to that is that it takes a lot of the spring pasture quality management out of spring because they don't go to seed until pretty much December or early summer. And I feel that in the time frame when nitrogen isn't as widely used, particularly early in the season, needing early season growth is quite important. And on average, you're only picking that up with earlier flowering material. So the key would probably be to think strategically about using some mid-maturity earlier material, and probably at about 30 to 40% of your area over time would be one of the answers, but being well aware where those paddocks are, because they will have pasture management challenges 2 to 3 weeks earlier than the average pasture on your dairy farm. So being well aware of your flowering date, writing it on your farm plan, and knowing exactly where the paddocks are will help you manage pasture quality through late October through to the start of December.
I would make one other comment, and I guess entirely agree with you, Alistair, but it will also depend on what's there now. And so probably if we are having a lot of late flowering ryegrasses, then the introduction of some mids could be quite beneficial. If there's a lot of mids there, then actually the introduction of some later flowering varieties might actually be of benefit, and that will depend on what the seasonal requirements are. And I think across the country, certainly, and I think this is the really important point here is understanding what your pasture curve looks like and what your demand curve looks like. I think it's really important. So the recipe won't be the same for everybody, but I think the general principles that Alistair's just outlined hold true, across the country. It's just the differences will be where you've come from and what that supply and demand curves look like.
And yeah, just summarising again, the colder you are, particularly in the spring, the more likely you are to want to investigate earlier season grasses that grow earlier in spring, because colder conditions with moderate nitrogen use can be quite challenging to hit pasture production at a key point in the milk production curve.
Particularly, again, if you're calving early.
Sweet. Thanks for your question, Dylan. Another one here from Angie. What crop options people might have when they miss the ideal sowing window?
So there's no detail on this question about an exact example. So what I would always highlight is if it's in springtime, you've actually got to be very, very careful, because if you miss your target windows, you are literally sowing into summer conditions. So you are typically sowing crops in spring to harvest spring moisture before the onset of summer dry conditions. So if you miss your target spring window, your very next phase is summer dry or drying soils. And this is a nightmare for agronomists, because fundamentally soil moisture conservation is a big deal for germination and your crops getting established. If you miss your primary window, the one thing you probably need to recognize is you've also missed your window for target grazing dates, which means that whatever you consider using, if you have a plan B, needs to have a maturity or a ripening or a grazing window that still fits your target time. So often it's a shorter maturity crop of some description that you're putting in the ground, crossing your fingers that the soil isn't too light, too fluffy, not enough seed contact. You need to roll to make sure your seed has got contact as you head towards dry conditions. And you are looking for earlier maturity crops that grow faster, ripen quicker, and can be grazed at the same time as if you hit your target date earlier. Quite important. In the autumn, quite a different story. Basically, you can get away with sowing virtually anything early if it's the moisture conditions are right. But as you get later and later, you tend to find the success of brassicas get weaker and weaker. You move to ryegrasses, and then from ryegrasses to oats as a way of accumulating winter feed. So the 2 times a year have quite 2 different answers.
Yeah, what he said.
Awesome. I personally love this question that Howard sent through. Sum up in 1 sentence what your favourite thing is about each other.
Oh, you go first, Al.
Oh, mate. Well, it would be so simple to just say it's your sparkling personality. But the thing I do like is that inside your sparkling personality is actually a very bright person who brings a whole lot of thought to a whole lot of questions, and you're a real academic wrapped in a very charismatic package. And I think that's probably one of the deeper insights I probably even thought about answering that question with you. But I always get amazed at the styles of things you create and do at an academic level, and a personality that doesn't come across that academic at times.
That's a bit of a backhanded compliment.
I don't know what to say.
Yeah, well, maybe.
Anyway, Alistair, the thing that I really I really appreciate is that I always get, sometimes it's brutal, sometimes it's blunt, but you always bring a perspective to an issue that cuts away all the surplus stuff and gets to the heart of the issue and provides solutions too and opportunities to solve that. But I always recognise that it's coming at you blunt, right? And you're going to get it in the smallest words and it's going to be right at the heart of it. But if you can cope with that, then it's so refreshing because it really highlights what the solution is. So I really appreciate that. If I've ever got a problem, I know Alice is going to give me his very blunt opinion of how that could be solved. So, and I really appreciate that.
As I say, a very weird question, but it's okay.
Yeah,
it's
right.
okay.
Can we finish that now?
If you have any more cute questions, whether they're technical, lighthearted, or anything in between, please feel free to email us at info@agricom.co.nz or hit up our Instagram and Facebook page at agricomnz.
Thanks, Lara.
Thanks.
Thanks, Lara. Well, Alistair, you're looking very festive. Must be the time of year and the colour of your eyeliner or something. I'm not sure. But what are we going to be covering today?
Oh, well, Glenn, we're going to have a bit of a lighthearted look at our careers, to be honest. We've had a couple of stories that have occurred over that time, and I'm just thinking the diversity of the different things we've experienced with some of our colleagues and their friends and some of the stories, it might be worth sharing just for a giggle.
Yeah, but lighthearted look at the last 20 or something years of being on the tools, if you like.
Absolutely. Oh, and I suppose at the heart and soul of it, both you and I have spent a huge amount of time in Australia, and we've got some really close friends and colleagues over there, some of which don't work for our company now, but when the names are mentioned, they'll know who they are. And look, I don't know, you and I have only travelled very rarely in Australia together, but we've had a few moments together that always crack me up. And I still remember a Warrigal field day in Gippsland with the Stevens pasture team, which probably was one of the very few times we were together in one of those events. Can you remember that one?
Yeah.
What I'm talking about?
Yep. It was actually one of my first trips to Australia with you at field days. So you can kind of picture this. It's kind of a 2 or 3 day field day event.
4 day event.
It was a 4 day event, and so we're at the field day during the day, and in the evening we retire for maybe a meal, and then head off to our hotel room to spend the night before we get up and do that all again. and
also because we're on, and back in the day too, it was hard to get accommodation, and these Warragul's quite a decent sized town now, but always hard to get an accommodation. You have to book a long way ahead, and quite regularly there'll be 3 to 4 of you in one of your motel rooms.
Yeah, and because it was a studio unit, I don't think we were sharing, necessarily a double bed or anything silly, but we had this unit where there were 3 or 4 bedrooms, and we each had a room in that. And as I recall, what had actually happened is we'd been staying with the Stephen Pasture Seeds team, and with some leaving the group and no one else arriving, there was only 2 of us, so we were too big for the accommodation we'd been in, and the Stephen Pasture Seeds, with a few people arriving, they were too big for the small unit that they'd been in. So we actually swapped over halfway through that. And it happened to be what were we doing at the field day?
We're launching one of our flagship products, 150, the perennial ryegrass, in the day. And we used to get right in behind the launches of these things in Australia, particularly. And so very, very themed tent and site. A lot of visitors turn up and talk to you about your general pastures, but we were launching 150 over there at that time. So it's quite a long time ago.
And anyway, so this big 150 launch, and we'd swapped the key thing is we'd swapped over these motel units. So we'd gone into the area or into the unit that the Stephen Pasture Seeds team had come out of. And unbeknown to us, that one of our colleagues over there had decided to play a prank on the 2 Kiwis in terms of this product, this launch. And so what he'd done is when we'd changed over, he had got every alarm clock he could find, probably in the whole complex, and he'd hidden them in drawers, under beds, in the bathroom, and he had set the time for the alarm to go off, right, at 10 minutes to 2, right, and of course AM, 2 minutes to 2 in the morning, right? And so, of course, we were asleep, very tired after a couple of days at the field day, and all of a sudden, these alarms just started going off at 10 minutes to 2. They were coming off from they were going off in the bathroom, in the drawers under the bed. We couldn't find one. One was in a cupboard somewhere, all going off at the same time. And the next morning, Alistair, what was the conversation?
Our very good friend and colleague, and his name will be mentioned at the end, basically walked up to us and said, "Did you get it? Did you get it? 150, 150."
Yeah, 10 minutes to 2. It's called 150. So yes, it didn't. It occurred to us quite early on, actually, that this had all been set up for what hasn't been a great product.
Worst thing about it is he actually snuck into our room the second night and did the same thing all over again. So we thought we'd cleared it out, and next thing the alarm went off again at 1:50 a.m.
Yeah.
Thank you, Carl Drever.
Yes.
Anyway, that's just a start, and we've had a lot of awesome colleagues over the years, and one of our colleagues back in the PGG days was the territory manager for New South Wales, a good friend of both of ours, a gentleman called Dean Baker. And what I love about Dino was that he had this story that I just enjoyed so much, and everyone he told, I think, enjoyed, for the sole reason is that he, no matter how many years after, the emotion of the moment still kept on coming out in the way he described the story. But he was an agronomist out near Dubbo checking a paddock of peas one day on quite a large farm. So this would have been a huge paddock. And he had jumped the fence and he went out into the paddock and lifted up these peas and checking from mildew and bugs and stuff, and lifted up this peas, and here was this dirty big brown snake. And so he went reeling backwards, and he's about 6'4", probably 6'6", actually, reeling backwards, stomping through these peas, heading for the fence. And the way he tells the story, it was all panic. It was 36 degrees. He was hot and sweaty. And he reached the fence. He put his hand on top of the post to leap over it. It's quite a large property, big station. And the fence post collapsed on him as he was leaping over it.
With the snake in hot pursuit.
Yeah, well, he probably passed about 3 other snakes on the way back out of the paddock in his panic, but it was more the fact he stuck his hand on top of the fence post and the fence post collapsed under him. That wasn't his issue. one, where was the snake? But the issue was he ended up going between all the barbed wires. So he had a barbed wire across his chest and between his legs. So he got wedged between the barbed wires on this fence. And if anyone recognizes what it means to be tangled in barbed wire, it's not a great thing to get out of. And so he's sitting there wondering what the hell to go on. And next thing, he gets this almighty whack because the station outrigger, the electric fence post, it was on it. And it was the only thing he could literally grab hold of to leverage himself out of this barbed wire. And if anyone understands the issues of having power and barbed wire, it's actually a really lethal combination. So this guy was sweating. He was getting really anxious because he couldn't pull himself out of this electric fence. And so every time he describes the story to him, his voice is quivering from the fear of the snake. And now he's wedged between barbed wires on a barbed wire fence, with the only way he can actually physically leverage himself out of it is to grab hold of the outrigger and pull himself out. And he thought, shit, he only has about 3 or 4 whacks on this outrigger left in him before he was in deep trouble. So in the end, he leveraged himself off it. He ripped his whole shirt off and ripped the crutch out of his pants. And I think the way he describes it, he just drove back to the office, went home and just stayed in a dark room for the afternoon to calm down. So, it was a delightful story that I really enjoyed the telling.
Very good.
Oh, and I suppose the one thing about time with Dean is I spent a lot of time in New South Wales travelling the whole eastern seaboard, but I was also doing extension work with the DPI, setting up trial systems with DPI at the time throughout New South Wales, but also setting up our own first series of demonstrations. So this is in the early 2000s. To mid-2000s. And one of the things I was doing one time was setting up a trial site in southern New South Wales at a place called Queanbeyan, which is just on the edge of the ACT. And it's quite a moment, and it sort of sets a theme for a couple of the wee stories both Glenn and I have got around lightning. And it was a really calm day. It was almost a blue sky with just a few clouds in it. And I had this quite large handheld rotary hoe out preparing a sort of about a 30 by 40 metre trial block in the bottom of this paddock just off the road. And I was busy pulling this, and it was a really calm, bizarre sort of atmosphere. I didn't think much about it, but next thing, the transformer on the power pole directly across the road from me, probably no more than about 80 metres, and I was on this rotary hoe digging up this plot, exploded, and it got hit by lightning. And I literally could smell the ozone in the air, and the hair on the back of my neck was standing on end. Dean was sitting in a car, 4 rubber wheels on the ground, on a cell phone, wondering what the hell was going on. And here I was holding this rotary hoe. Every cockatoo within about 100 kilometres was up in the air, and it blew the power to Queanbeyan for the whole afternoon. And I was just literally the closest I've ever been to a lightning strike. So that was my little wee story.
There is nothing like a lightning storm in Australia. Yeah. They do it
really well.
Very, very well.
You had a good one too, though, just driving.
Yeah, so we were up the Hunter Valley. Sydney, just north of Sydney.
On the main road, though?
No, well, we were inland, and we were driving along. We could see the storm coming, and I was actually with Dean, our colleague, and just driving along, and we drove into this electrical storm, and which was okay. It started raining, and I was pretty okay with that. But then when trees started exploding along the side of the highway, I was like, "We've got to get out of here." How do we not know that the car's going to get hit next? So I was pretty keen to get out of this thing because there was lightning going everywhere. So we found the first place we could go, and it happened to be a little place called Raymond Terrace. And so we ducked in there, and we went into the bottom of a car park in a small shopping mall. right? And so we drove in there, and the lightning was still going, right? It was a wicked storm. Anyway, but we pulled into this place, Raymond. Now you'd never go to Raymond Terrace for holiday, and you certainly, it's a great place to go and hide from a storm. But what we discovered in the car park in Raymond Terrace was that probably some of the locals were probably more scary than the storm. So we didn't spend a lot of time there. But we rolled out of there, and we could see the storm rolling away, and we went in the opposite direction. But it was really they do a great storm there.
Well, speaking of that, the one that you and I experienced together was the cracker. We were in Benalla in northern Victoria, a location we spent a lot of time with a family business that we called Smythe Seeds back in the day, which I really love working with over the years. And we were sitting at the top of the town hotel in Benalla, where I spent a number of weeks over the years. And I just remember so vividly, again, a lightning strike that felt like it had hit literally above the hotel. And the funny part was, every door along our whole section of the hotel opened, and everyone walked out in their pajamas or their boxes to see what was going on, because literally the lightning strike was directly over our buildings.
And it woke everybody up. It was such a crack that woke everybody up. And then the rain after it was really impressive. So we're all standing there, like
everyone randomly looking at each other.
Yeah, like strangers in the night looking at this thunderstorm in various states of dress at this very impressive storm rolling through Benalla. And as I said, no one does lightning like Australia does. It was very impressive.
Juddy and I have a long, you can imagine we do a bit of banter over the years. And one of the things that I take great pride in is that I have never had as many small audiences as Glenn has. I think I've only, my smallest audience to a field day or a presentation is about 2 people. Now, Glenn, I think, has had one person twice who turned up.
Does that say something about my subject matter? I'm not sure.
I don't know, but our job is always to support our colleagues. Our job is always to be on point, regardless of who's there. And that always brings me to that story that you have with one of your presentations that had just one person.
And I guess it's a story of self-awareness. I think if there's a message we can take from this, it's about being a little bit self-aware. And as you can imagine, it was a road show. We were on the road through Victoria and southern New South Wales, and on that particular roadshow it was around brassicas. So we'd travel to different towns, and we had these meetings set up where we'd bring in various agronomists and sometimes farmers to these meetings and talk a little bit about. I was actually talking about the grazing management of brassicas and how we can get the most out of the brassica crop from the different grazing management we can put on them. And so and I had another. And I shared the stage with someone else who was talking a little bit about insect protection of brassicas, and we had these presentations, and it was basically a rinse and repeat everywhere we went. I'd go first and talk about the grazing management, and then this other speaker would come along, and he would talk about some of the seed coatings and the protection from insects for these particular crops. And I remember we rolled into Queanbeyan. So it was the area that you got struck by lightning, Alistair. Anyway, so we rolled into Queanbeyan, and we got ourselves set up. And on this particular event, one person turned up. Right, so we had an audience of one. Now, we'd been getting 30, 40, 50 people along to some of our meetings, but at this particular point, one person turned up. And of course, because there's one person there, and we're servicing our clients, that one person was going to get the presentation in exactly the same way as it had been 50. So anyway, I went first, and this person sat in the front row, because it would have been a bit awkward if they were sitting in the back row. But anyway, this person sat in the front row. And I got through my presentation, and she'd asked a couple of questions, quite intelligent questions. Anyway, so the person I was sharing the presentation with, he got up and he started talking about seed coating and some of the insects that are controlled by this. Unfortunately, he was about halfway through that presentation when our audience of one. right, her phone goes, right, and she looks at it and she looks at me and she goes, I'm really going to have to take this, right? And so it was a personal call and we went, listen, go, right, just go. Anyway, so she gets up with her phone and walks out the door and goes down the corridor to take this personal phone call. So that wasn't the problem. The problem was that my the guy who was doing the presentation, let's just call him Jim to protect him. Jim keeps going. So now we have an audience of 0, and Jim's still firing away in terms of talking about all the insect pests and all the rest of it. He's not that self-aware that there's now no one. And so one of the guys I was with, we were milling around the back, kind of said, well, shall we actually tell Jim that he's actually talking to nobody? We thought, well, listen, we'll let him go on for a couple of minutes. So a couple of minutes passed and Jim's still going on about insect pests and some of the controls. And in the end, we kind of stopped him. Jim, I've got a question. And he sort of, yes, what's the question? I said, who are you actually presenting to? Because there's no one here. And he went, well, where did she go? I said, well, she's taking a call. But just, you might, and the funniest thing was, he said, well, should I continue? And we're like, no, listen, I've heard this for about the 5th time, right? So just, no, we'll just wait until she comes back in. So she did eventually come back in, and Jim had to kind of rewind probably 5 or 7 minutes of his presentation so that she could catch up. But a really good message there in terms of being self-aware. Probably not great to be presenting to an audience of 0. It's being self-aware of your environment, I would say.
That's quite classic. Oh, to be fair, we've got a couple more stories from Aussie, but they've been vetoed because they're probably inappropriate. Anyway, coming back over here to New Zealand, and we've had quite a long period of time in both product development but nutrition. You've done a lot of weird stuff to animals over the time, Glenn. All with ethics and approval. and all,
I don't know where you were going there, Al, but anyway.
All with animal ethics approval. And but you've done some pretty interesting projects over the time, and there's a couple of stories that are quite freaky in their own right. But you do take the piss a lot, and that's a pretty strong lead into one of your more classic moments.
Yeah, this is a bit embarrassing, and this is about technology actually, and being able to use technology properly. And so that's the lesson we can learn from this story. So in the development of Ecotane, a lot of one of the mechanisms which Ecotane uses to reduce nitrate leaching from the urine patch is to actually increase the volume of urine and decrease the nitrogen concentration. So nitrogen concentration in the urine patch is really important when it comes to the amount that's being leached. It's a key indicator. And so a lot of our work was looking to see whether different cultivars, different breeding lines, different grazing managements, different animals, livestock responded differently to plantain Ecotane in terms of urine volume and urinary nitrogen concentration. In one of the other aspects of plantain through the animal is a biological nitrification inhibitor that actually comes through the urine. So animals are consuming plantain. There's a breakdown product that actually ends up in urine, which blocks that natural conversion of urinary nitrogen through to nitrate. So in technical terms, it's a biological nitrification inhibitor. And we didn't know quite how stable that was. So we were doing some work where we were comparing some different cultivars of plantain, collecting urine from those sheep that were grazing those and getting them into the lab to try and work out what those compounds were. And so one of the key things we were trying to do is get the urine from the sheep to the lab as quickly as we could. And so we had this system set up where the lab, we set a day aside, and the lab was ready to receive those. And so what we were trying to do is minimize the time between the urine coming from the animal and getting to the lab. And the idea was that if the urine was still warm by the time we got to the lab, that was really good. It was meaning that we were going to probably capture most of those compounds. We didn't want to leave it sitting around for a long period of time. So we'd set up the day, and then the idea was as soon as we'd collected those urine samples, I was going to get in the car and I was going to drive to the lab. And as I left, I was going to text them, right? So use my technology to send a text to the lab saying, there is urine samples on their way, and therefore we could minimise. Everybody was right on schedule. So as I was this particular day, we had a full set of urine samples. I think we had something like 6 or 7 different lines, and we collected urine samples from all those animals, and they were sitting in the back of my car. And on the last urine sample was collected, went back in the car. We banged the boot down. I jumped in the car and I got on my cell phone. And this particular day, I was kind of feeling, that I, a bit humorous. So I text the Urine Express is on its way. And I hit the button and I started driving to the lab until I realised, actually, the person I'd sent that message to wasn't at the lab. It was actually my cousin, right? So I get this phone call from my cousin going, "What on earth are you doing, and what is the Urine Express?" And and so to this day, I apologise to my cousin that Urine Express is not on the way to her, and that I simply names were very similar. So and I just got the wrong person. So listen to people if you are sending texts that you should really make sure it's the right person you send it to, because some of the texts I send, particularly around urine, are probably not appropriate for most people. So
that's a classic.
So yeah, the Urine Express is on its way is a term that haunts me a little bit because I sent it to the wrong person.
Oh, it's so interesting in watching those developments. I was my little moment, not quite the same, but it was a little bit of lack of awareness at the moment as well. I'd actually I'd herniated and a herniated disc in my back, and so I was having some quite bad times with a back problem. That is 15 to 16 years ago now.
Yeah, that's painful.
Oh, yeah, it was. It was a pain in the back.
Yeah.
And actually then it just shot all over the place. So I had a couple of rough incidents with that before I had my disc taken out. But it was in the release and the development of the brand of the Grass 150 again, something I played a big role in over the day. And it was at the back at Dunsandel in Mid Canterbury in the South Island of New Zealand, and I had this one of my earlier paddocks of 150, and the dairy operation had just grazed it in a bit of wet weather, and I'd driven up there to just have a look at the paddock, and I'd taken photos of the paddock, and when I arrived, they'd just grazed a block in the wet, and they'd pugged it and damaged it. And I'd lined up along the side of the fence, and I took a beautiful photo of the sort of damaged area and the rest of the paddock. And I tasked myself to come back in 3 or 4 weeks to see how the damage had come right. So I lined it up on the fence, lined it up with a tree in the background. So I had 2 before and after sort of photos. And I made a call to come back. So it's a back road. It's quite a long way out in the middle of nowhere. And I pulled in along the side of the fence. I was in an automatic car at the time. I pulled in and I pulled along the fence to try and find where I was going to take my before and after photo, my after photo.
So you're getting your landmarks.
Yeah, getting my landmarks sorted out. And it just so happened, this is time before digital cameras on your phone. I had a camera, I had a brick, and as most people that know me, I spend quite a bit of time on my phone, and it just so happens I was talking to you on the phone at the time. So I was double tasking, and I'd driven up the fence line. I put it in reverse and I drove back, and I found my spot. I was talking to you on the phone. I had my camera out, and I got out of the car and I turned to the paddock and took this photo. And it's quite an iconic photo of the time, because what it highlighted is the resilience and the recovery of a diploid perennial ryegrass from damage, because you could not tell literally where that damage was just 3 to 4 weeks later. And 150's resilience under pasture damage was quite impressive. And that was a very strong graphic of before and after.
And I've actually used those photos in the presentation, so I can appreciate how
the forethought of
that, and the fact that you got them lined up because they were perfectly the landmarks were lined up. You've done a fantastic job in terms of that. But I guess there was something else that you hadn't taken into account.
No, because I was talking to you on the phone. I was taking this photo. And I wasn't really aware of what was going on. And I was actually in quite a lot of pain because I was going through one of the episodes with my back. I was like really in quite a bit of pain. And I sort of suddenly thought something wasn't quite right. And I turned around. And when I got out of the car, I must have left it in reverse as I was reversing up. And because I was in long grass, it wasn't rolling when I got out of the car, but I must have left it in reverse because I turned around and the car was 30 to 40 metres back down the road.
Going backwards
down the road behind me. And all I can be thankful today is that literally it was a quiet back road. But that probably wasn't the funny part. The funny part was watching this person who was in quite a lot of pain and quite lame trying to catch this car going back down the road in reverse. And so it was sort of it was just a moment. And it was one of those moments where we have an award in our research farm associated with people that make dumb decisions. And the point is no one saw it.
No.
One, there was no one that witnessed it. There were no cameras. No one saw it. So if I didn't tell anyone, it didn't happen.
And the interesting thing is I didn't know that for a year.
Yeah, I kept it off the radar for a whole year.
And so now I know why you hung up on me abruptly because you were chasing your car that was going down backing down the road.
Yeah, it was a moment. All right. But I suppose one of the ones that takes the cake for me, I just thought it was all about context because I really enjoy that project you did on radish. And some of those things, like I say, you do the most interesting scenarios. So I think we'll call this one the last one, Juddy, because it's one of my favourites.
Right. This here is, it combines a lot of elements here. There's an element of blue skies discovery. There's an element of context here. And there's an element of just sometimes explaining things wrong, right? So it's got all these elements. So we had there was a radish product that we had, and some of the glucosinolates in that radish, some of the secondary plant compounds, there's a chance that they may actually slow metabolic rate of an animal, right? So not strong evidence, but evidence enough. And so we decided that we were going to go and do some work to see whether we could actually pick up a difference from sheep that were grazing radish to them grazing ryegrass in terms of metabolic rate. And one of the proxies of metabolic rate, so that's basically the amount of energy an animal uses to basically keep themselves upright, alive, breathing, all of those things. So, and so one of the proxies of this thing called fasting heat production or basal metabolic rate is actually heart rate. So what we thought is if we could actually measure the resting heart rate of sheep, what we might find is that there are some differences between those two crops. And now, let's not go into what the useful understanding of that could be. We just wanted to see if we could find this difference. Now, of course, you can measure heart rate of sheep by grabbing a stethoscope and going up into their armpits and listening to the sounds of the heart. But what you tend to find is that that's not resting because they're pretty excitable in terms of being restrained in the yard. So that wasn't really going to help us. So what we decided to do was we went down to the local university and probably unbeknown to them, we borrowed from the physiology department some of those strap-on heart rate monitors, that athletes use for tracking their heart rate during exercise. So these things aren't designed to go on sheep, but we didn't actually tell them that we just wanted 15 of them. And so we got them into the yards and we strapped them on their sheep, and they work because they sense the electrical signals of the heart, right? And so they need good electrical conductivity. And so with a with a these are wethers actually. With a wether in full wool, you can't get any contact. And then they kind of Bluetooth to a watch, so that's how they work, and that's how we're going to record that heart rate. So with a full body of wool, we were never going to get electrical conductivity. So we get the shearing handpiece out, and we put a blow round, kind of around the brisket and up around the side to try and get electrical conductivity. And of course, once we strap those heart rate monitors back on those animals, there's still probably 2 or 3 millimeters of wool that the combs missed. And that's enough to be insulative to the electrical signals coming from the heart. So we had a bit of a think about this, and so I came up with this brainwave as sometimes I do, and I shot down to the local supermarket, and I went and bought a pack of disposable razors, thinking I can trim the rest of that 2 or 3 millimeters of wool off down to the skin, and then we're going to get some really good contact, and then we're going to be able to measure resting heart rate. Anyway, so we got some disposable razors, and we found that it would go, it would do 2 or 3 centimeters, and then they'd all clog up, and we couldn't get a really good, we couldn't shave them very well with these disposable razors. So anyway, again, another brainwave. So this is where it gets really interesting. So I went back down to the supermarket, and I went down to the personal care aisle, and I pulled out 2 large tubes of hair removal cream, right? Going, I think this is going to work. We're going to get rid of the small amount of wool by putting all this hair removal cream all over these animals. And then the other thing that really works with some of the older style heart rate monitors is to get really good contact between the skin. What you need is something that's water-based. For athletes, it's when they sweat. You get a really good contact because you've got water between the monitor and the skin. Of course, sheep aren't going to sweat for us. So the other really good thing or the other good substance that you can get good contact with is actually personal lubricant, right? So KY gel or the equivalent. Anyway, so I went down the other end of the personal care aisle in the supermarket and got 2 large tubes of personal lubricant. So that's good. And then the other trick that we get is if you actually mix a little bit of salt in with the personal lubricant, you get a really good conductivity. So I went round to the baking section of the supermarket, and I bought a large bag of salt. And then I kind of think, right, so I'm going to hair removal cream, I'm going to get rid of that. I've got the personal lubricant there, salt in that. And I thought, that's probably going to be a bit messy, isn't it? So I shot around to hardware, aisle 17, and I got myself a couple of tea towels, right? Because so that was gonna make sure that things didn't get too messy. So anyway, so I thought this is going to be really good. I've got this. So I went up to the checkout to pay for all this, right? And so as I was loading the conveyor belt that went up to the lady at the checkout, I sort of counted this, right? I've got I think the 2 tubes will be enough of the hair removal cream, and I'm pretty sure the personal lubricant, there's enough there to sink a ship and to deal with that. So that's great. Tea towel, salt, great. I think I've got everything. And as it was going up the conveyor belt, it kind of dawned on me about that point that all of those things together, right, didn't really look that kosher, right? This looked a bit yucky. And as I got to the lady on the checkout, she took one look at me and she said to me, I always remember it, she looked at me and she said, well, you're going to have a very interesting afternoon, aren't you? Right? Which I thought, oh yeah. And I don't know why I said this, but I was trying to explain myself. I said, listen, lady, it's not what it looks like. This is for my sheep, which was probably which was accurate, but was probably not the right thing to say. And just two things from that story. First, I've never been back to that supermarket. Never been back to that supermarket. And secondly, actually, this worked. Right, we got the hair removal cream. Took all of the kind of burnt all of that wool off perfectly. We had it was as smooth as anything. We caked on this personal lubricant with some salt mixed in it, in under the heart rate monitors, and we got perfect connection. Put those animals out, and we got like hours of resting heart rate or grazing heart rate of sheep in both of these treatments. It was fantastic. The downside was that the variation between sheep was larger than the variation between treatment. So we didn't quite have the power right. We couldn't
more KY jelly.
And probably more heart rate monitors. But it worked, which was really useful. Of course, the next thing was trying to get personal lubricant and hair removal cream through on the expenses was a little bit more difficult. So I thank my managers at that time for kind of overlooking what could have seemed like quite a dodgy kind of purchase at the local supermarket. So that's my story. So sometimes we do things that in one context seem completely normal, but
harmless,
and quite harmless, but in other contexts can seem quite dodgy. So that's my story.
Well, look, this is leading into a very festive time of year, and the reality is we just wanted to keep it lighthearted and share a couple of moments that always put a smile on our faces when we think about it, and are always get more outrageous over a few drinks too, I'm sure. But here's wishing everyone a very, very Merry Christmas, and I hope you have a safe New Year, and let's hope for a cracker in 2024.
Yeah, thanks, Al. Listen, I've got to go and check the rain gauge on the reindeer. And so better go. We'll have a Merry Christmas and we'll catch you in the new year.
See ya. Bye.